Okay,
Right.
we have a quorum.
Before we start tonight's meeting, I think Ms. Parker wants to introduce the newest employee of the city, who's sitting back here. And
Our director for the community center, Patrick Hawkins.
welcome, Mr. Hawkins.
And
I'm happy to be here.
Mr. Hawkins started working with the city as of yesterday, and I was over at the community center this morning, and he's already engaged.
We've got two items on our agenda tonight. Mr. Ivanko is going to take the first one, and then we're going to convene into closed session for the purpose of the discussion of purchase or lease of property. So what I'd like to do is move without objection the citizens' comments ahead, so that we might hear any comments they might have about what we're going to discuss in closed session. I think I did say at our last meeting last week that anything that we might want to decide from that session would go on next week's agenda, so that people would have an opportunity. Right.
And I do that in the closed session.
Right. So, in any event, anything that has to do with the city hall will not get a recommendation option decision from the council until next Tuesday night. Okay? With that, if you want to come forward and...
Let me just ask Mr. Chairman, so do I understand correctly that what we discussed in closed session could be potential leases, but I just don't want to put the cart before the horse, because some of the factors, like the document just gave us, I think need to be vetted pretty thoroughly publicly before. So if you're saying that that's where we're going to do this, that's fine. But I don't want to leave here tonight us having kind of come up with a preliminary attitude about something and then sort of slam it down everybody's throat next Tuesday.
Well, and the documents that I passed out relate to questions that was raised at our last city council meeting, which was discussed in open session. And so that was the purpose in providing that information to you at this point in time.
But it needs to be further discussed in open
Right,
session now that we have the answer.
Right, it wouldn't necessarily be an item for closed session, but
Right.
potentially for your meeting next week or
Okay.
subsequent meeting, you can certainly discuss
As long as
it.
that's the case, I'm not
I
having a
agree.
problem.
Can everybody hear us? You're going to speak tonight in the closed session, are you not? Why don't you sit between these two gentlemen? Just come forward.
Yeah, that's it.
And you'll be able to hear. So, would the other two gentlemen like to speak tonight, Mr. McGusty and Mr. Turner? Mr. Turner.
I guess it's more of a question. I don't know what you call them on the tax appeal, but I'm just going to assume something, I don't know. If you got a tax appeal, that means you may have to repay taxes. I don't know that. And if that's the case, you've got to repay taxes. Would that money be affected in the general fund, or like the Brownfield on the hill, the tax appeal there, and that affect the revenue from the Brownfield? So I'm just asking a question. Would this affect the general fund?
This tax appeal is a general fund tax. It's a personal property tax.
Okay.
Ford Motor Company.
Okay, so it could affect the general fund.
Right. Any other questions? We can take the elected officials, but I don't know if you want to do that tonight. Two people here. We can delete that, we'll go right to Mr. Ivanko. You can revisit some of this stuff. Ivanko.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and members of council. I need to apprise you of a matter that is disconcerting and financially challenging to the city. It's a very serious matter. During this meeting, I will be telling you about what has occurred, and will be giving you, documents that give you kind of a record of what has occurred. However, and feel free to ask any questions, relative to the documents. However, when we get to the point about finding the money for a refund, I would ask that that be held for a separate meeting and a closed meeting, because this is a matter involving continuing litigation. And so with that, I'll begin just by stating this whole matter, the issue and the problem has its origins back in 2001. And it involves the assessment of the facility on Enterprise near I-94, commonly known as the Ford Test Lab. In 2001, the Ford Motor Company filed a pollution control exemption application with the State Tax Commission. The procedures for considering a pollution control exemption application involves the State Tax Commission refers the matter to DEQ, or the Department of Environmental Quality, for their recommendation whether the exemption should be granted in part, or should be not granted at all. Back in 2001, the Department of DEQ was not really examining the details of these exemption applications, and at that time the DEQ was pretty much rubber stamping these. After they were rubber stamped with approval, they would go to the State Tax Commission, and the State Tax Commission, held the opinion that they were bound by the recommendations of the Department of Environmental Quality, such that even if it seemed ludicrous on its face, the State Tax Commission felt they were compelled to follow the recommendations of the Department of Environmental Quality. What happened is that, well, to begin with, the Ford Test Lab, located here in Allen Park, is an operation where they are testing vehicle components to try to build components that will go into a vehicle that will reduce the amount of pollution that that vehicle emits as it's driving down the road. The nature of a pollution control exemption certificate for property taxes is to exempt machinery, equipment that is controlling pollution that's emanating from that site. And so what's going on at the Ford Test Lab is that they are meeting the requirements, or attempting to meet the requirements of EPA, the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, such that the car that's going down the road in California or Texas and Florida is emanating less pollution. Again, the exemption from property tax talks about controlling the pollution that would emanate from that site. A good example would be scrubbers that will go in the smokestacks at facilities like Severstal Steel that will, take the steam, etc., that's coming from the process and scrubbing out, making sure that there's no particulate matter that's entering into the atmosphere. So it's controlling pollution from that facility. What happened here was that Ford was granted the pollution exemption back in 2001. Later, Ford Motor Company and Chrysler, Daimler Chrysler, and Detroit Diesel tried to get the same exemptions
in other communities, one of which was Dearborn. This whole question went to the Supreme Court, and there was a decision filed with the Supreme Court in 2008 that basically says that for the same property located in Dearborn or Redford or Auburn Hills, that doesn't qualify for an exemption certificate. However, for reasons that I don't understand, the exemption that was granted to Ford remained. Now, that exemption was revoked once back in 2005, and it was revoked again in 2012. I became your assessor in January of 2013, and when I walked in the door, the exemption had been revoked by the State Tax Commission. And so as I was putting together the assessment roll for 2013, which occurs generally in January and February, so that the Board of Review can then sit in review of that assessment roll in March, the facts were is that this property did not warrant an exemption. And so the value of the personal property, which is the machinery and the equipment, as well as the real property, went up in 13 based on the legal circumstances that were present at that time. Ford later went to Wayne County Circuit Court. In fact, this is the second time they've gone. They went to Wayne County Circuit Court back in around 2005, the last time the State Tax Commission revoked the certificate, and sought to have it reinstated. I did not receive, first of all, that case was not decided until June, and I was not provided with a certificate by the State Tax Commission until the tax bills were already out. So, there has been a variety of legal challenges that have occurred from the summer of 2013 through to 2 weeks ago. And I need to review these facts with you so that you're aware of the problem. And then later, this honorable body will need to determine how the city of Allen Park is going to address the financial issues. In your packet that I've just handed out to you, it starts off with the opinion from the Supreme Court. And if the entire matter here, if you just turn to that one document and go to the 4th page, which is actually the first page of the written opinion, and keep in mind too, I have given you a copy of the ruling opinion. This opinion has 3 other parts. There were some justices that were opposed to this opinion, and there was another justice that was opposed to part and agreed with part. But what I've provided you here is the part of the opinion that serves as the legal basis for not granting the exemption in Dearborn and in Redford and Auburn Hills. And I'm just going to, the whole matter is just in the first 6 lines. And I'll read from this opinion. And it reads, these consolidated appeals concern a tax exemption that aims to improve Michigan's environment by encouraging entities to reduce air pollution they create in Michigan. Based on the plain language of the statute, we hold that in order for equipment to be exempt, it must be installed or acquired for the primary purpose of regulating or curbing the spread of pollution in Michigan. Further, the equipment must actually and physically limit pollution. So that's the order. Now, the exemption that the Ford Motor Company started to enjoy in 2001, and needs to be reinstated, and I'll get there. This not only controls, machinery and equipment, but their exemption also goes to the chairs, the desks, the, furniture, fixtures, things that have nothing to do with a process, nothing to do with controlling pollution. It goes to the building, as if the building itself has something to do with controlling pollution. It goes to the parking decks, that somehow the parking decks are controlling pollution. And the car stackers that are next to the parking decks are somehow controlling pollution. If it seems ludicrous to you, then you share my perspective. When I came in and as the assessor, and I saw that the State Tax Commission revoked the exemption, personally, I felt that they were doing the right thing. Because, there's just nobody here that can explain to me how this chair can control pollution. But the exemption goes to that chair, if it's located at the Ford Test Lab. So the first document, again, is the opinion. And this goes back to 2008. The second document, it's dated October 12th, October 18th of 2012, excuse me, is the order and directive from the State Tax Commission to Ford Motor Company that indicates that the exemption is going to be revoked, and that would begin in 2013 when I became your assessor. Going to the next document that's dated July 3rd of 2013, what happened is that, in Wayne County Circuit Court, in June, the Wayne County Circuit Court ruled that Allen Park must reinstitute the exemption. Ford Motor Company, and this would be a directive to the State Tax Commission, because I, as the assessor, cannot issue an exemption of this nature. Only the State Tax Commission can either issue the exemption or potentially revoke it. But in July of 2013, when our tax bills are already in the mail, this order came through from the State Tax Commission telling me that I'm supposed to exempt this property that we've already levied taxes on. If you go to the second page of that document dated July 3 of 2013, you'll find the actual certificate. And this was what was sent to me as an order from the State Tax Commission. Now, I looked at the certificate, our legal counsel looked at the certificate, and we focused particularly on the third paragraph, which says that this certificate provides the authority for the assessor to exempt the pollution control facility for which this pollution control exemption certificate is in effect from ad valorem taxation. And so it provides, the way I read it and the way our legal counsel read it, is that it provides the onus on me to identify that equipment that is controlling pollution at that Ford Test Lab, and then exempt that equipment. I wrote a letter to the Ford Motor Company asking that they provide me with a listing of the equipment that is being used to control the pollution emanating from that site. They ignored my letter. I had no response. They won't even acknowledge that I sent them a letter. So now we move on in time.
Well, Gary, before you move on,
Yes.
I think the fourth paragraph is more telling. The fourth paragraph states that as amended will remain in force as long as the facility is designed and operated primarily for the control, capture, and removal of pollutants from the air.
I agree.
So
I agree. I agree. So
it's
I
not
mean,
being operated at that.
I mean, if anybody here was giving this order, I mean, I think that you would do your diligence like I did to say, okay, let me know the equipment that's subject to this, and I'll get that request. And Ford ignored that request. And in fact, nothing happened. So as we move along, on the next document, you can see now on January 30th, I'm getting a letter from the State Tax Commission that ends in a threat. And then you can read the last paragraph. Basically, you know, the State Tax Commission is writing me, and as their executive director, Ms. Kelly Sobel, is acting on their behalf and telling me that they issued this exemption certificate, you know, Gary Evanko assessor, you know, you're not recognizing it. Keep in mind, they're not asking me any facts. Ford Motor Company had told them Gary Evanko's not paying attention, Gary Evanko's not doing what they, you know, what he's supposed to do. And so without asking for any facts, they just sent this letter, and then the third paragraph, the final paragraph, it says, it is the State Tax Commission's expectation that all assessing officers will follow certificates issued by the State Tax Commission. The State Tax Commission has in place processes to address any assessing officer that ignores a certificate issued by the State Tax Commission without a stay or order of an appellate court. Now, as they wrote this, I mean, you know, our attorneys were actively involved in seeking a stay and seeking to have this reversed. But without asking the question, the State Tax Commission begins to threaten me. What's interesting is that shortly after this letter, I was asked to appear at Wayne County Circuit Court by our legal counsel. Quite frankly, I thought I was asked to be there for moral support. I was quite shocked when I was sitting in the courtroom and listening to the attorney from Ford Motor Company arguing in front of this judge, asking that Gary Evanko be found in contempt. I don't look good in orange jumpsuits, you know, and it bothered me. But we still needed to. I can't reverse this until I feel that we're on solid ground, and you know, this truly deserves to be exempted. Now, the next document is an order from the Court of Claims, and this brings us right up to April of 2014. Here, the Court of Claims is addressing this matter, and when you read through this at a later time, you will read where Ford Motor Company is looking for sanctions against the city of Allen Park. Not only do they want their taxes refunded, but they want to sanction the city of Allen Park. You know, in other words, Allen Park would have to pay for all the attorneys and legal expense that Ford has incurred up to this point. The judge in the Court of Claims agrees with Ford Motor Company and says that if Allen Park doesn't surrender, he will issue sanctions. And if you go to the last page, page 6, the last full paragraph, in the last line, this judge, just to make sure you know his order is clear, states, this is the warning shot across the bow. There's obviously, you know, he's not mincing any words. Now the final document that I received in this pack, and it says at a session of the court held on May 6th, but then it was revised to May 7th. When you read through this one, it becomes very specific, and it's ordering me to change that rule, and I've got 7 days to do it. And there's no way that I could look at this as anything other than if I don't change the assessment and the tax rolls by that 7th day, I will be wearing an orange jumpsuit on the 8th day. So with that, the next document is a letter that I sent to the treasurer here, to the city of Allen Park, Ms. Armstrong, as well as Mr. Blaitovich, the treasurer for Wayne County. And where I have advised both of these treasurers that pursuant to this order, and I am under court order, I must change the 2013 and 2014 assessed and taxable value of the real and personal property owned by Ford Motor Company and located at the test lab. And so I did. However, as you can see, this order comes on May 14th. As everyone here is aware, we're at the end of our fiscal year. Any money that we collect has been spent. I have no idea, Ms. Parker at this juncture has no idea where that money's gonna come from. The rules have been changed. The tax rules and assessment rules have been changed, but the refund has not been made. You'll notice that in the final order, they talk about for 2013, they're saying that Ford is due $732,886.02. Now, it should be stated that that's all taxes. So that's not just the city's taxes. I mean, that's the county's taxes, Huron, Clinton, Transportation Authority, everybody's taxes. However, the city of Allen Park, for just 2013, has, a big share of that, almost $400,000. In fact, at this juncture, before calculating any interest charges, and I'm sure that Ford would want to be paid interest on their money, the total refund for just 13 amounts for the city of Allen Park amounts to $379,641. And that also then presents a similar financial hole in our 2014 budget. As the city leaders, you need to be advised of this circumstance. And we do have legal counsel that is still, fighting this action. But with regard to how this refund is to be made and what steps must be taken, beyond this meeting, again, I strongly advise that that strategy be discussed at a closed meeting, since this is a matter involving continuing litigation. Is there any questions about the documents or the process? What I did or what I didn't do? You must understand is that I'm doing everything in my power to live within the law and yet represent the best interests of the city of Allen Park. But it got to a point where there was no room to hide, no room to run, and so the rules have been changed, but refunds have not been made.
Council have any questions?
Just have one other comment to add to Mr. Banko's comment. In the order, it did require the city to pay the amount within 7 days, and we were not able to do that. So I believe, as he mentioned, we're trying to look at what the options are through the court to give us more time.
As our status as we're under emergency manager control, does not, do we have any leeway with anything as far as?
Not in this instance.
We're on an island by ourselves?
Yeah, you're pretty much on your own.
There are options, but again, those really should be discussed in closed session.
Yeah, just one question. The pollution control stuff is kind of a creature of the federal EPA, is it not?
No. That's the big difference here. Ford's trying to say it is. However, the statute that provides them an exemption from local property tax is a state issue. Okay? I mean, it's for the benefit of the state, not the United States. It's just to protect the air quality in Michigan. Now, DEQ has been doing a better job these days, and to give you an example, you know, up the road a piece, you know, is the Marathon Refinery. And Marathon, you know, they built a new distillery process that, you know, converts oil shale to petroleum off of Oakwood, but then they also redid the refinery that you see along I-75. And so in that process, they did have to include quite a bit of pollution control equipment, because the refining process, you know, has the effect of emitting pollution, you know, particulate into the air. And an interesting part, though, is that Marathon asked for a pollution control certificate for the equipment that reduces the amount of sulfur in the gasoline. This time, the DEQ says, no, that doesn't qualify. You know, when you reduce the sulfur in that gasoline, it's going to make for clearer air in California to Boston. But, you know, this act, this exemption, goes to controlling pollutants and contaminants that are emanating from a site in Michigan. And so, and DEQ is doing, you know, is doing the job now. However, they haven't done the job in the past. And the, by the way, this may sound comical, but it's just serious as can be. In the statute that provides for the exemption certificate, there is a provision in what's required for revocation. And there's a clause in there in that if the equipment is not being used for the purposes that it was originally, you know, installed, then the certificate needs to be revoked. Well, Ford Motor Company doesn't deny. In fact, they admit that the equipment inside the test lab, you know, isn't controlling pollution. But then again, it wasn't controlling pollution in 2001, and so the use has never changed. And the only way you can revoke it is the use change. Well, it wasn't controlling pollution when you gave it to us, and it's not controlling pollution today. The use hasn't changed. We get to keep our exemption. And they've won on that argument repeatedly. And in the last court cases, you know, the rulings from the courts, you know, cited res judicata and collateral estoppel. Basically, what that says is, we said no twice. Which word don't you understand? So, I mean, we are in a tight spot. You know, there are potential remedies, but then again, you know, they need to be discussed in a closed session.
There are other questions for Mr. Ivanko. Does the will of the council want to add a closed session at the end of the next meeting to discuss the position it wishes to take on the matter?
Will we be able to get a telephone conference with you in Wayne County Jail, or what?
No, I've already done my part. You know, I get to keep my blue suit. I get to keep my blue suit.
Maybe we'll all get an orange suit.
Just based on principle, it doesn't make any sense.
You know, and keep in mind, I mean, I've you know, a year ago, I mean, I reached out to Ford Motor Company and just, you know, looking for at least a compromise. You know, when this came through in the summer of 13, you know, I said, well, what if, you know, if you would recognize that your building and your parking decks have nothing to do with controlling pollution, you know, I'll recognize the exemption for the equipment that you're using to test carburetors and things like that. And, you know, just, you know, hoping to, you know, meet us halfway. And they go, no. Actually, it took weeks. You know, I'm waiting to hear from them. I called the person from Ford Motor Company a couple of times, finally made contact, and the answer was no. No deal. They want the whole enchilada.
least he took a couple weeks with you. Brenda told me right in this room, no.
Maybe it was after she told me, I don't know.
No, mine was, I met with him 2 weeks after we took office. It's not surprising.
This has been a roller coaster. We think we're up and then we're down
Yeah,
again.
and then it got reversed,
Yeah.
you know, after that in 11.
I don't know, it just reminds me, there's a quote, and it's attributable to, I believe it's Bat Masterson. It's either Bat Masterson or Wyatt Earp, but it basically, he says, you know, life is fair. You know, life is basically fair. Take ice, for instance. Everybody's got it. The only difference is that the rich people have it in the summer and the poor people have it in the winter. But life is fair.
Can the public ask questions? Yep.
They did earlier.
We did.
Oh, sorry.
We will convene into a closed session for purposes of discuss a legal strategy after next week's meeting.
Which council is handling this for us? We have a special tax council?
Yes.
It's on the last page of the
Oh, is it?
document.
Yeah, I was looking for that.
Foster Swift Collins.
Oh, yeah.
Foster Swift Collins, yeah.
I was gonna say, I'm sorry that I'm the bearer of bad news, but you have to understand is I did fight the good fight and held off for as long as I could.
Anytime you put two attorneys in the same room, you know that everything gets convoluted.
That's right.
That's a fact.
That's why you should always have at least 4.
Mr. Mayor, may I have excused?
Good. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to convene to closed session. Do we need a motion to do that?
Yep.
I have a motion.